Hello and welcome to our guests. I think we may still be populating here, but excited to get started with a really important topic. You are attending the latest installment of DSEF Insights, which is part of the DSA Engage webinar series. As I hope all of you know, DSEF works with all of our academic partners through the Fellows Program to mainstream understanding of the channel, educate the next generation about direct selling, elevate industry reputation, and provide expertise and data-driven business intelligence to improve company performance and support company performance, which is what we're going to talk about today. Our topic is Improving Sales Performance, a Tale of Two Studies. And I love that title. I'm sure at some point we'll hear that it's the best of performance, it was the worst of performance. But be that as it may, it's an important conversation that emerges from award-winning academic research conducted by today's guests, and it bridges psychology, machine learning, and sales performance. And we all know that direct selling independent sales forces are distinctive from traditional in-house sales representatives that are hired by companies, and as such, they need to be recruited and supported differently. However, the published literature and actionable research on the recruitment, training, support, and motivation of direct sellers is very thin. And today we have two teams of DSEF fellows who are working to address some of those important challenges and answer some very pressing questions of what it takes to improve company performance by improving sales performance. Specifically, we have an expert panel today that will look at what predictive analytics and machine learning tells us about what matters most in recruiting and what factors contribute to high performance, retention, and satisfaction, how examining psychological aspects of sales representatives' affiliations and identifications with companies, their brands, their uplines impacts their likelihood to be retained, and what factors can assist in eliminating representative or distributor churn. And also we'll talk about future efforts to drill down more effectively on some of these issues for individual direct selling companies and their supplier partners. So a rich conversation. And I want to thank our four DSEF fellows who are joining us to share findings of their research today and help us address some of these challenges. First, let me introduce the team from Fayetteville University. They are Dr. Caroline Glacken, who is Professor of Entrepreneurship and Director of Innovation, Entrepreneurship, and Economic Empowerment. And she's joined by her Fayetteville State colleague, Dr. Murat Adivar, who is Professor of Management and Director of the Center for Enterprise, Resource Management, and Advanced Analytics. We also have a team from the University of North Carolina in Pembroke. We have first Dr. Suzanne Altobello, who is the William H. Belk Distinguished Professor of Marketing, and she's joined by her North Carolina colleague, Dr. Will Collier, who is Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke as well. So thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to have you. Also want to mention, it's related to today's conversation as well, that Dr. Glacken and Adivar's paper, Using the Power of Predictive Analytics in Sales Research, was recently published in the Journal of Personal Selling and Sales Management. If you're interested in information on that paper or getting that paper, we'll put some information in the chat for you on that. So look for that. It's a great paper, and I think some good insights in there as well. As always, we want this to be an interactive discussion. So please use the Q&A function to give us questions as we're going along. Please add those questions as we're going along, and we'll get to as many as we can as we go through. And also, of course, the chat function is live, but we hope you use the Q&A function first. So how to get our discussion started, Caroline, what was the impetus for this research that we're talking about today?
Sure. Thank you, Gary, for that introduction, first of all, and for the opportunity to share this interesting and dual purpose research. So hopefully it will help people and have some positive impact on the industry and the companies within it. I've been kicking around DSCF for a while as a fellow, and I've had the good fortune with that program to attend DSA conferences, to interview leaders in the industry and look at the case studies and have pretty solid conversations with them. And clearly we hear frequently about churn. We hear about, motivation for distributors or reps. How do we support them with training, education, incentive plans, many different issues. And that triggered thinking, well, what would be useful to people in the industry, and what might they not do as a matter of course with their existing marketing teams and IT forces and analytics that they already do. And also when we started looking at the DSA National Salesforce study and looking at the data regarding earnings and doing the multiplication out, we realized that, this is abundantly clear to people in the field, but there's so much churn. Can we relate it to things that we know about the reps, about their attitudes towards their brands, about where they want to be and their expectations? And so I chatted with some friends, and they have very different perspectives on how to look at things.
Mhm.
And so we actually came at it from two different perspectives, sort of the marketing psychology side of it and the sort of the data analytics side of it.
Yeah, I love that combination, and appreciate that you've been around a long time, and I think
Oh,
you've been able to dig in with us and with our companies, and we appreciate all of that great work. As we talk about this, I'd be interested to know how the research and findings can help direct selling companies and sales marketing managers improve their bottom line results first, and also kind of what studies have been completed to this point.
sure. First of all, a primary goal is to increase retention by making sort of customized approaches depending on the person we're talking to in terms of leadership and recruitment. Increase recruitment quality. Although obviously we know that reps recruit reps, the companies provide support and education around recruitment, and they provide recruitment materials. So what can they do? How can they improve how they present themselves to recruit the reps that are going to stay and that are going to sell in the volumes they need them to sell in? That then, of course, leads to increasing revenues, which we like. We like increasing focus, and of course, increasing profitability is really the net effect.
Right.
Revenues without the profitability, they really probably don't much care about, right? How are we going to cut that churn down? That's a lot of time and energy devoted to recruitment and retention that could be used for selling. So how do we do that? And that'll decrease costs and waste. And what company doesn't want to have more profits and not waste?
And this gets at both better development when we have them and better targeting to get them.
Yep. And once you have them, what are the levers that you can control for that person or that category of rep that might be differential from, and Suzanne will get a little bit at age and things like that. Maybe, are they going to want help with something, but they don't need the other, and you don't want to waste their time either with things. So, yeah. And so far, we've actually done 2 studies, both on the same data set, but 2 different perspectives. One perspective, which is the work with Murat, Dr. Adavar, is applying predictive analytics and machine learning to the data from the National Salesforce survey to the extent that we could to draw out what factors really mattered at different points in time, and he'll speak to that in a minute. And the other was one examining cognitive, evaluative, emotional, and behavioral aspects, and how they drive brand loyalty and intention to remain with a DSO.
Gotcha. That's great. That's great. And this is for Dr. Adevar. And Murat, what did you find when you employed the multiple established predictive analytics techniques to the DSCF DSA National Salesforce Survey data set that you have?
Thank you, Gary, for your question.
And welcome.
As my colleague Caroline mentioned, we developed two predictive models. Okay, the purpose is to increase retention, increase recruitment quality, increase revenues and focus, decrease churn, decrease cost and waste. The purpose was that. And many results we obtained were in alignment with commonly held beliefs regarding factors of Salesforce performance. And so, as I mentioned, we developed two predictive models. First of them can be used for recruitment. The other one can be used for active direct selling representatives, and to measure their future sales performance. And in the first model, for instance, we were able to predict the financial success of independent representatives based on reported information available at recruitment. The financial success, by the way, here is defined as the seller's net income from direct selling of $10,000 and more, okay, $10,000 and more. And of course, the variables that are available at the time of recruitment are the ones including hours to devote to direct selling, the number of new potential customers they felt they could attempt to sell in a earn long-term supplemental income in a month, and desire to meet new people and expand their social circles, and motivation to earn long-term supplemental income and discounts were most important factors for us in the first model. Despite being such a heavily female set of representatives, males were more likely to have higher overall performance. That was the thing we obtained in the first model. Unsurprising, those who joined to make direct selling a career did better than those who were not interested in that. The same for those who wanted to build networks and social connections. All of these relate to commitment, expectations, demographics, and the organization. In the second model for active representatives, we were able to identify the factors which companies and or uplines can control or influence. Key factors include time invested, positive experience of direct selling, recruitment of downlines, tenure and use of technology in operations, and specifically the factors are downline size, number of successful recruitment efforts, hours spent selling per week, sales team experience, time with the DSO, mixture of sales to customers and for sales consumption, satisfaction with the direct selling experience, met expectations, focus on direct selling as a career, age group, and ethnicity. Okay, these are some factors, key factors we found in our second predictive model for the active representatives.
Gotcha. That's really interesting learning from that Salesforce data set. Caroline, how might direct selling companies use this information in their business operations? Help us sort of squeeze that down. You might be on mute. Yeah, you're on mute, Caroline.
I know, I realized it, but couldn't get back from the second screen. This is industry specific, right? So for some, it may tease out a little differently for an individual firm, but we found things that we don't really usually associate that direct selling, like the performance of mail, and the notion that we've looked a lot at it as a gig opportunity. And so that was sort of compelling to me to say we need to do more, to both of us. And also that Latinx sellers tended to have higher performance than others. And again, that may be how the database was drawn, but it was a pretty good sample. So it led us to wonder about that. And so I think one of the values of doing this for a company is that it challenges what we think we know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's, I think, a lot of the value that the fellows bring is that we typically, while many of us and several of us here have been involved in direct selling at some point in our lives, and we've spent a lot of time with the field, or not the field, the industry. This is going to challenge some of the held perceptions. And I think at this point in time, where we see the rise of the gig economy, do we want to be a gig, or do we look at, how do we go forward with that? And I think this research challenging some of those expectations is worth probing at further with companies.
Yeah.
And specifically, they could do things like developing promotional materials for recruitment that are designed to look and feel more diverse, and emphasize the opportunity to make selling as a career more directly, not as an income opportunity. Difference in terminology, right? Not as an income-driven opportunity and sort of the issues that, we dealt with regulatory and that kind of thing, but as a career versus a gig. Which way does it really play out best?
Yeah.
And really clear is that setting and meeting expectations is important. And the channel has done a lot about that, and a lot of the disclosures of earnings and things like that. But it's more than that. It's expectations as to how much time it'll take to generate things, what kinds of trainings really are going to be helpful for that individual. And I believe my colleagues on the other study, I'm on both studies. So my colleagues on the other study are going to talk a lot about sort of expectations and behaviors. And this is where we intersect in one way. One other area that showed up was technology. And that was an interesting finding, that people who used certain technology perform better. And as one is creating support, getting people familiar. Now, this survey was done before COVID,
Right.
and the industry has changed a lot.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that in a minute. But those who were adopting certain technologies were just performing better.
The early adopters, in other words, you mean?
I guess back then they might have been kind of early adopters, but for the industry specifically, yes.
Yeah.
Using it for selling in a very targeted, specific way.
Yeah.
And that was really important too. And the other big issue was just creating an environment geared to long-term, full-time careers matters.
Gotcha.
And that may be contrary kind of to what a lot of thinking is.
Yeah.
So, and again, obviously, if we did it today, we might find different results. But
Right.
what was interesting is we found things that you kind of say, oh yeah, that makes sense. The more time you spend, the more downlines you have, right? The better your revenues are going to be.
Right.
But then the yes buts are the part that are really interesting.
Yeah.
And the opportunity to tailor.
Well, a couple things, Caroline. First, I want to sort of jump onto something you said. One of the reasons we so value our partnership with the four of you and the rest of our fellows is this idea that we get a fresh look, we get fresh expertise, and you guys have engaged with our industry and dug deep, but you bring another set of eyes and another set of expertise to our way of thinking and approaching it. And I think that's really helpful and really interesting, and how we compare to other channels and how other channels go about these challenges and those kinds of things. Incredibly valuable to have. Before we get to that bridge to our friends with the other study that you worked on as well, I'm just curious, and you kind of led us into this nicely, I think, that this initial look being before COVID, what you and Murat see as next steps.
Right.
As Caroline mentioned, this study has been done based on the data before COVID, okay? And a lot of things has changed after COVID. And we found that the people using some certain technologies are more likely to be financially successful in direct selling business, etc. So I think this study has to be renewed based on maybe new data on after COVID. And by the way, businesses can consider these generalized findings and they can see how they might apply to their organizations, and they can give us some feedback, okay? So, and we can add some more business specific or organization specific parameters to the problem. And maybe we can get some, organization specific or business specific models as well. Caroline?
Yeah, and shameless promotion for the next step.
The best kind.
Best kind. Hey, didn't get to do what I do without shameless self-promotion. So I think that a next step for the direct selling organizations is really to take part in phase 2 of the research. And that phase is actually ready to roll and very simple. One of the big challenges that both studies suffered from is that the NSFS, which is conducted every 5 or 6 years approximately, is very, it's not available by company, and it didn't have questions that were designed in a way that was amenable to the kinds of analytics that we have capacity, Bharat has, Suzanne has, Will has capacity to manage these days. And so we were not able to get as granular as I think would be useful for organizations. All of us have had this discussion. You've had this discussion with us as well, clearly. And when you're looking at machine learning in particular, Rock can correct me on this, for a company to have a useful model, it has to apply to that company. Yeah. Because clearly Princess House is going to have a very different answer to some of these questions than, say, Plexus would. Well, Plexus has a lot of Latinx people too. Right. But Sensi might not have the same results, right? Yeah. So we're looking at actually doing non-redundant groups of 2,000 active sellers in the first few companies that take the offer. Let's put some time to this. We can't be producing 100 of these reports as a fellow project, but asking those companies to take the survey, which has been approved for its human subjects by both of our institutions, literally sending out the link to those companies 2 times, to those reps 2 times. Yep. We never see their mailing list. We don't solicit the mailing list. We don't ask to keep the, any identifiers of the individual person. So there's no opportunity, frankly, for us to reach back at those reps, for us to share responses from one company to the other for specific representatives or anything of that nature. And I know that that's a big issue for folks. Yeah. But in return, we can give the industry, without the names of the companies in it, unless they want them disclosed, to give the industry a report that's going to be more specific than what we were really able to do, especially, well, in either case. But also the companies would each get a tailored report for their industry or for their business. Yeah. And they could see what was most meaningful as we look at the machine data, yeah, which is something that most companies, I don't believe, are really playing around too much in AI. If they are, they're looking at it for different reasons. For example, customer service and chatbots and things of that nature.
Well,
So that's kind of where we're looking. We really want to take it. We want to look at post-COVID, and we want to be able to be more applicable to the companies.
No, I appreciate that, and I'll join you in that shameless promotion, Caroline. I think it's an incredible opportunity for companies, as you said, to get some very specific information in a specific report based on responses of their representatives, but also for the industry, that broader, deeper dive on this information and more actionable recommendations that come out of that. And I'll also say for the partnership we've created with over 250 academics across the country who engage in very different ways in advancing understanding of the channel and elevating reputation and providing all of these expertise, it's a value to them to have this kind of access to data. It's anonymized, it's protected, it's nothing that gets beyond their use for those purposes, but it helps them publish, it helps them do the work that they need to do and bring us more value. So I really want to encourage our companies to step up and participate and take advantage of that opportunity. And we talked about this in our board meeting, and Caroline was nice enough to join us for that. Let me first remind everyone to use the Q&A function as we continue along. We'd love to have your questions. We really want this to be interactive, and the conversation doesn't end today, but it can be ongoing. But we really would like to have your thoughts and questions. Let me switch to Will and Suzanne and a little bit here. So, Will, I wasn't going to mention you're a fellow Horn Frog, but this purple background is inspiring me that for us. So.
It is.
I'll give you the salute, but you and Suzanne and Caroline explored specific relationships through the lens of social integration theory. Can you tell us about that approach and what we need to understand about that?
Well, sure. This approach contrasts with what we just talked about, pardon me, in that it's more theory driven. So you're approaching the problem from a specific approach or theory. So we're really want to compare this to the machine learning approach ultimately and see how these two compare. But basically, we're looking at self-reported cells, representative attitudes and perceptions, a variety of things, behavior, performance, longevity, satisfaction using the same data set, obviously. Now, what we're looking at is social identity theory. I think that was a typo there. I'm sorry about that, but social identity theory. And it really has four components. And so you want to look and try to measure those four components and see which components of social identity theory really help better predict things. So we look at a cognitive component of social identity theory, which is really a cognitive awareness that an individual has of being a member of a particular group. That's an important way that really human beings define themselves, by what groups they are members of. And then there is also the evaluative component, which you evaluate your group in terms of a positive or negative connotation. Also, there is an emotional component, obviously. Human beings are emotional beings. And so we want to look and measure the emotional involvement with the group, a sort of affective or emotional commitment to the group as well. And the final component of social identity theory is really the behavioral component. What behaviors do individuals engage in support of their group that they are a member of? So really, in the original database, we looked at questions that were already there that might measure some of these factors. And in the future, we hope to write more direct questions that more accurately measure these factors.
That's really interesting. And yeah, I wish I had been alert enough to catch that mistake. Sorry about that. But
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. That's how little I understand the theory. So that I didn't.
That's on me. I have this mental block about integration.
Yeah, you're testing me. I know. But it's interesting
It's a thing.
it's interesting that connection, members of groups, communities. I mean, that's such a big deal in direct selling, obviously. Suzanne, I'm curious to bring you into the conversation to talk a little bit about what you guys found in that unique look.
Right. So I think that Will and I approach this from a bit more of a psychological perspective than a data perspective, or using the existing sales questionnaire to kind of see what the data tells us in terms of the machine learning model. What we did instead was take a psychological theory called social identity theory and said, which of these components of social identity theory best predict two outcomes? One was more your recommendation of the direct selling organization to others, and combined with your likelihood of continuing with representing that DSA company, right? Whereas, and then the second dependent variable in our research was net income. So what we wanted to do was see if the psychological social identity components predicted those two outcomes. And we found different results based on whether we were trying to predict longevity with the organization or likelihood of continuing versus a net income. I mean, we did find some consistency in which of the social identity components that Will just brought up, which are the most significant in predicting likelihood to continue and recommending the DSO to others with net income, but the predictive ability of likelihood of continuing was very strong. So those psychological components predicted almost 50% of representatives' likelihood of continuing and recommending to others. And of those components, the ones that were strongest were the evaluative components of the company, which really reflected, if we look at those questions, the belief of the representative that the company shares my values, the company has similar interests of mine, and so kind of strengthening that perception would be the big takeaway for DSOs. And then behavioral actions also predicted likelihood of continuing. And so for our model, we got slightly different results depending on what outcome we were exploring. And then we found this other really interesting thing regarding age. And so we did find some differences in what parts of the social identity theory are most important to different age groups in predicting likelihood to continue. And I think this is important for many reasons. One is that, in terms of the organization, it tells you what parts of the company that the organization should be emphasizing to their recruits and to their representatives. And then it also helps to identify, what are things they might not necessarily need to emphasize too much, right? And so it's kind of maximizing, our research combined with Murat and Caroline's machine learning research really tells us what should the company be, how can they optimize their communications with their representatives to have the best outcomes, right? And those two outcomes could be different. Could be net income, or it could be more, likelihood of continuing and recommending so growing the organization.
Mm-hmm. And so it's really compelling, Suzanne. This idea of like segmenting your communication and your support and your training, whether it be demographically, by age, and how the company's made up currently, right, and how to communicate best with those groups. But also, I presume it would be valuable to a company in an industry or a channel that's trying to appeal to sort of the next generation, right, of people coming along.
Absolutely. And what we don't know, because of the data that was collected in 2019, actually I think it was collected in 2018, but we analyzed, we obtained it during COVID, is that for the older sales representatives, for example, the behavioral component of social identity theory, meaning what they're doing on a daily or weekly basis for the company was a much stronger predictor of recommending to others and likelihood of continuing. So sort of like behavioral, emphasizing doing the work sort of thing. Whereas for younger people, it was really the evaluative component was so much stronger, meaning that companies for young representatives, sales representatives, and probably for recruitment purposes, really have to focus on the connection that the younger representative feels aligned with the company's values. And that was, 4x larger in terms of its predictive ability than behavioral component for the younger sales reps.
And I want to stay with an earlier theme of shameless self-promotion here, but I would imagine that the deeper data that is company specific would add even more value to all of that you just described.
Absolutely. I mean, I really feel like, if I'm thinking about how we would work with companies, I mean, we have, like I said, we have the surveys ready to go that are much more focused on these specific components. But what we can then do is really advise of how that specific company can optimize their representatives' likelihood of recommending and longevity with the company, as well as optimizing for predictive purposes of net income, with the machine learning part. So it is very much more. I'm all about efficiency, right? We want to help companies understand how they can use this data and use us and our expertise to really make their communications with their representatives much more effective for both the organization and the representative. So, kind of identifying these are things that work for other successful representatives within our organization. And so these are how we can help our representatives be optimal. And then how we can, of course, strengthen those relationships between the perceptions of value, that this company shares in your values for recruitment tools, but also for staying with the organization over time.
That's terrific, Suzanne. And I like what you had to say about efficiency. And I know this is true of the team, and Caroline sort of emphasized this in speaking to the board, but if a company participates in this next round of research, it's something that you guys can turn around pretty quickly with the model established and the surveys established and those kinds of things. Anything to say on that, Caroline?
Yeah, actually, it kind of leads us into the so what now what,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
This process has been interesting. We've blooded our foreheads a few times along the way. Been sort of surprised and not surprised along the way. And we realized that there is definite merit in doing this because not everything falls neatly into the buckets of usual expectations. And because it can be used, with machine learning, once you figure it out, you keep learning, it can keep learning. Mm-hmm. And it can be used to literally predict, where you're going to be in a different way, which is, of great value, but greater value when done with what we feel is really reliable and valid data that can be replicated, right? The study becomes replicable, and that makes it more reputable. And it's not just poking around, coming up with a theory, finding a theory that fits what we're thinking, and then saying, let's make the data fit.
Right.
Can I answer Michael's question in the Q&A?
Yeah, well, I'll get to that. Let me read it for everyone, because I absolutely want you to do that, Suzanne. And I would put on this last point with Caroline, from somebody who barely understands the technology of putting a background on my Zoom. Right, the more we use it, the more predictive and the better this gets for the industry broadly, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
And also, the cool thing here is, and the way we said it, the tale of two studies, is that we've designed one relatively short, not the questions upon questions upon questions. I think we're talking, what, 30, 50 at the most questions? It's a lot shorter than the studies that have, been done prior, because it's focused on the specific information. And those people that do this, that have been on that list, can be carved out from people getting redundant requests.
Yeah.
But by doing it, it's a twofer, right?
Mhm.
Buy one, get one, but they're both your investment. There is not a fee associated with this. The investment is literally pulling that data and meeting with us when we get the results to debrief on it, basically.
Yeah.
And that's not a real common opportunity. But part of being a DSCF fellow is, it's all great to go to the meetings, but if we're not providing value through research, we really don't have a job as a DSCF fellow. So this is an opportunity to make a difference. And honestly, this is really cool research.
Mhm.
And the reason that we were able to publish in such a high level journal is because this kind of work hasn't been done with independent sales forces.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just being done to some extent with sales forces in general, company sales forces.
Yeah, I know.
And this channel is so different in that way. And that's kind of what makes it more interesting.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting and important point, is that this channel is very different. And in terms of people understanding and acceptance of the channel to be invisible in these sort of academic and teaching and learning and all that kind of stuff isn't helpful, but also the research to support the channel can be sort of thin. So this is a great opportunity on all fronts. So we do have one question, maybe a couple from our guests. So let me ask this first one of Dr. Altobello. From Michael Borg, what specific behavioral components were the strongest predictor of continuing with the company? And then it looks like he has a follow-up, and did those components share appeal across multiple companies? So really good question.
I'm going to answer the second question first, because in our existing data set, we could not separate by company. So all of this is collapsed across 8,300 respondents that we had, that had complete data for all of the variables that we were looking at. When predicting, so now to the point of the first question, when predicting the continuation with the company, there were two behavioral predictors that were significant. One was, how many hours per week do they work on their business? Now, this is self-reported, but you can think from a marketing perspective, a number of ways that you could collaboratively, encourage your salespeople to work on their business together, so that you are almost managing their time, the time that they spend, working on their business. And that was asked very generally on the questionnaire. So it doesn't break it up into, like, actually, what does that mean, for the representative working on their business. The other predictor of whether they were likely to continue, and I thought this was super interesting, was whether, to the extent to which they buy and use the product themselves. So encouraging your direct sales representatives to actually use the product themselves, and the more they do so, the more likely they are to continue. And part of it is obviously some social identity, tie-in that, I am this company. You can trust me because I use this product, and I believe in this product. And so that was important. Now, when we were predicting net income, and this is something that, again, we have to kind of look at the two different types of analyses that we did here across the two projects. But when we were looking at the social identity components of predicting net income, the only behavioral predictor of net income was hours spent per week on the business. So then buying and using wasn't a strong predictor of that.
Gotcha. And were those consistent across demographics, age, that sort of thing, or no?
No, no. So that's what we were saying. So we just looked at this all data combined, to be honest. We didn't look at age as a factor. Yeah. And so, but then we separated into 3 age groups: under 35, 35 to 55, and over 55. And we saw differences in the extremes. So in the over 55 age group, the likelihood of continuing the behavioral component was very strong. So we really have to convince those representatives who are older to spend time on their business. And they might need help doing that, right? Because they might not, have the technology, some of the things that Murat was talking about. They might not have the resources present. But for the younger people, it really was not about behavior. It was about affiliating with their identity in terms of their, value orientation. And then in the middle, both the evaluative component and the behavioral component were important for 35 to 55. So they were both important for that middle age group. But for the extremes, we had different effects. Gotcha. And again, that's across all the companies. So we did not distinguish between type of product sold, type of, category, anything like that.
Okay, that's really interesting. Michael, I hope that answered your question well. That's really good information. So we're winding down here. I want to just encourage, if there's any questions left in your minds among our guests, please put them in the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to them as we wind down. But maybe aside from participation in our next version of this research, which is going to be a great opportunity and a big deal, especially looking at all the things you guys described so well post-COVID, because obviously there's a big shift and change and a lot to learn there. Any specific recommendations from what you've learned so far for direct selling companies, or something that you're maybe most encouraged about as you think about direct selling as a channel? Or discouraged, actually, I don't mean to be. All right. So with that, I will say once again that this partnership with you guys specifically, and more broadly with your institutions, is so valuable to us, and we really appreciate it. And this is a great conversation, and I think a great way to sort of help our industry understand the opportunity that is available here. And I think we'll have good participation that comes out of it. And we really appreciate your willingness to engage and learn with us and about us, and your patience on a lot of this front to sort of, as you've learned and engaged with us, to continue to work on these things, and what you do to educate and again, mainstream the understanding of the channel beyond the specific research that has value to companies directly. So we really thank the 4 of you, Dr. Altobello, Dr. Adevar, Dr. Glacken, and Dr. Collier, one more time. We really appreciate you guys being with us. We really appreciate this great work and the great potential to go forward in this work. And also thank you to all of our guests that joined us for this conversation. We'll keep it going. We'll make this conversation available more broadly to our membership as well. So rest assured, this will be pushed out and shared and continue from here. And also look forward to bringing you guys back, because I know we're going to have some updated research to talk about. I'm very confident about that, that we'll be doing that. So thank you all. And just a couple things to wrap up, if Tamara will put a couple slides up for us. I want to give you guys a sense of what's coming next. First, I'll start before the slide gets to us, but on April 5th, exploring new data insights, correlations between key economic indicators and direct selling. A webinar discussion will be coming, and that's going to be a terrific discussion like the one we've had today. Again, sort of those deeper insights that are actionable for you and your companies. DSA's Social Media Day is coming on May 8th. Incredible response and participation on that day. And I want to encourage everybody to make sure you're a part of that. It's a huge part of promoting our channel, our industry, and helping that to be understood and appreciated and supported. So we really need you to be a part of that. Just as we need you to join us at DSA Engage, the national conference, June 14th and 16th, June 14th through 16th. You can stay on the 15th as well. It's not just those 2 days, but huge event, great opportunity to learn, network, connect there. And as part of that event, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Direct Selling Education Foundation. So we've got the Free Radicals, a great band that's going to play for us at a special fundraiser event. A great opportunity to engage with the foundation, with our company supporters and members, and our academic partners as well. Fantastic celebration and a great opportunity to support the foundation and our work. And that's really important to us. We exist on voluntary contributions from direct selling companies and supporters. So we ask you to continue to support and contribute. Appreciate those who do. And we'll put up a link for you to go if you wish to renew your support or add support to the foundation. So with all of that, little self-promotion at the end for us, but thank you again to the four of you and to our guests. We so much appreciate the expertise and thought and new ideas that you bring to our industry. Great value to us and a great partnership. Thank you so much.